Hello and welcome to the My Veteran Experience podcast. My name is Joe Wallace, and this podcast focuses on speaking to veterans about their experience and experiences and how it impacts what they do today. Very excited today to have Kim Mitchell as our guest. Just real quick, I first met Kim a couple years ago. She was still in uniform and working on the Joint Staff, and it's been great to see her since that time, and I won't steal that thunder. So, Kim, why don't you let us know what you want to know, what you want us to know about you?
Well, first of all, Joe, thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast and to share not only my story but my experiences. And also thank you for your service and everything that you do for our veterans in our military. It's very much appreciated. Just a little bit about me. I was actually not born here in the United States. I was actually born in Vietnam. I was fortunate enough to have some people that went out of their way to take time to give me an opportunity. And so I was actually found along the side of the road and brought to an orphanage in Da Nang, where I was fortunate enough to be adopted by a U.S. airman who was stationed at the air base in Da Nang during the war. And I was brought over in September of '72. I was about 10 months old, where I was able to just start my new American journey here in the United States. And it was, it's everything that you make of it, right? Every experience is part of who you are and who your background is. And so because I came from Vietnam at such an early age, all I ever know and all I ever knew was growing up here in America and having this American experience. My dad was still in the service when I was very young, and so we were stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, and then Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And then he retired, and we moved up to northern Wisconsin, where my mom was from. Growing up in northern Wisconsin, where you're 30 miles from Lake Superior, and you're the only Asian.
I was going to say 30
class.
miles for many Asians, right?
Yes, so kids eventually kind of make it a point that you look maybe different, and it usually happens right around the seventh grade time frame. And so, that experience, just for people pointing out that I look different, kind of made me start to realize that I wasn't from northern Wisconsin. I wasn't born in this country. And I think my parents, even though they never hid it that I was adopted, we never really made it a big deal, because it wasn't a big deal as far as they were concerned. I was their daughter.
It was just like kind of like Mean Girl stuff.
It was yes.
Okay.
It was everything, well, why is your skin darker than ours, or why is your nose round, or why do you have black hair? We don't have black hair. And and of course I'm like, well, I was born in Vietnam. Well, where's Vietnam? And so anything that seventh graders can make a point. But one of those things that I learned, a quick lesson in life, is about the power of humiliation, right? The power that you can hold over someone if you can humiliate them in public. And it's a powerful thing that I've really learned to identify, especially now here in the veteran space. Continuing on, I ended up graduating from high school in 1990, and I reported to the Naval Academy because I knew I wanted a life of service. I was very attracted to the schedule and the routine of service because of my father being in the service. And so I applied to the Naval Academy, and 2 weeks before I reported in for I-Day, my dad was struck by lightning and killed on our farm. And so I understand, again, a life experience of how I understand what can happen to a family, right? I can understand what can happen to a family structure and what happens to that family structure when something like a mainstay of your father is taken away from you, and how quickly that family structure can crumble. But I also learned another important experience, and that it's the power of community involvement and coming into supporting that family. And the town that I grew up in Solon Springs, was there to support my mom and my brother and I. And it was very much needed at a time that we needed it. The Naval Academy gave me a year off And so I was able to
Was
take
your,
it.
just real quick, was your brother adopted as well?
He was. My brother was adopted when we were stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. So we were both adopted. And so, you know, having that year to be able to take care of my mom and my brother and the farm was very much needed. And then the Naval Academy asked me to come back with the class of 96.
Right.
So I did.
So
I needed it.
No, so real quick, just before we move on to your Vietnam, you know, the coming from Vietnam. So I'll just interject real quick. So my father was in the Navy, and as a child, a young child, my memories were of Vietnam because he was off of Vietnam. He was on a carrier, and at the late, he was in a F4 squadron, and they lost aircraft and everything. But the big kind of situation or experience that I remember real well is his carrier, the USS Midway, was involved in evacuating Vietnam. And when in 75, in the fall of Saigon, he brought home this little pamphlet. It was Operation Frequent Wind. And then, so yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. I mean, if the fall of Saigon, 45 years ago yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And so it's you know, again, part of our history and part of who we are. I went back to the Naval Academy again, graduated in 96, but was a surface warfare officer. Did various ships and SOAR commands. I was a black shoe, you know, basically ensuring that the food and the lines were available for the Marines if the Marines embarked.
Oh, hell yeah. Those damn Marines are always hungry.
And taking up all the gym space.
That's right.
And so I was fortunate enough, though, in 2006, when I came off of sea duty, my first shore duty after my department head tours were complete was back in Washington, D.C., and I did 3.5 years of doing foreign military sales for the Navy, where I sold weapons, ships, planes, and equipment to foreign governments on behalf of the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. And I thought, honestly, at that time that I was going to go into international business development because I absolutely loved it. And I had put in my...
Arms dealer? You had arms dealer ready to go on your next resume bullet?
It was. And I mean, I had the Lockheed Martins and the Northrop Grumman's and all the big defense contractors.
Kim Mitchell, arms dealer.
Yes, very much so. I you know, because I was working very closely with Middle East countries. Yeah. And so everyone wanted the contacts that I had. And so I was planning on getting out and going to do that. And I ended up meeting a deputy undersecretary for Wounded Warrior Care and Transition Policy. Just ended up at a happy hour with him, and he started talking to me. And before I knew it, the following week I had lunch with him, and he asked me if I wanted to be his military assistant. And so one of those decisions in life, right? Like, do I continue with my processing out to go do that and do foreign military sales and international business development, or do I stay in the Navy and become a military assistant to this deputy undersecretary and just completely take a 90-degree turn? And I decided I was going to do that and just see what happened, see where the path led me. And so
you never know what a happy hour leads to, huh?
And you never know. And I'm one to not really turn down opportunities, especially if they seem interesting. And I'm willing to take a chance. And so I did that. I which of course, you know, the Navy was like, what do you mean you're going to the Office of Secretary of Defense? And how did this happen? And you know, this is not how the process works. Well, you know, I just did what I was asked to do, and before you knew it, I had orders to OSD and to be the military assistant. Did that for a year, and then Admiral Mullen gave me a call and asked me to come over and work in the Office of Warrior and Family Support, in working reintegration issues for military veterans, service members, families of the fallen, working with educators, employers, healthcare providers, traveling around the country with that capacity.
So real quick, so the first military assistant role, who was that reporting? So that wasn't Colonel Sutherland.
No, when I was military,
okay.
It was
who were you the assistant to?
no, his name was Noel Cook. He was an old government guy from.
So a civilian
He was a
DOD guy that
civilian.
wanted military.
Yes, he
Okay.
was a
Because I
civilian.
thought you were explaining going to work on the warrior staff.
Yeah, and that's
Okay, good.
yeah.
Because that's when I first met you, was when you
Hmm.
came over to Admiral Mullen's staff, and in fact, I have a photo. This event in New York City, which was one of the first big events that I attended after I joined Microsoft. It was in Manhattan, and you were in uniform with Colonel Sutherland, and I think it was one of the Microsoft folks, and you guys were on this. I took a photo. You guys were sitting on the stage, and I just took a photo. I forget who that. Maybe it been John Hearn. I
Mike
don't.
Allen.
It may have been Mike Allen, because I know he was tight. He was connected to you guys. So cool. All right. So you joined Admiral Mullen's staff.
I did, and that that was my last 2 years in the Navy, working in warrior and family support issues, traveling to 329 communities, and that's where my love for really looking for services that had impact for our veterans, our military families, and families of the fallen, and very much the nonprofit space. Which I have found myself in. That love for that type of work was definitely formed during those 2 years. Ended up getting out of the Navy in 2012 with Colonel Sutherland. He retired from the Army because we all know that we cannot let an Army colonel retire without making sure that the Navy is there to ensure that they don't get into trouble, right? And so we formed a partnership, a business partnership, where we formed a Dixon Center together. And at that time, Dixon Center was the Center for Military and Community Services, and we formed under Easter Seals, as you may recall.
Yeah, sure. I was at your offices there in DC. Yeah.
Yes, right there on K Street. And we continued our travel, and we continued our advocacy, and we continued working with, the communities, faith-based organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, educators, healthcare providers, service providers.
Talk a little bit about Dixon, like why it was named Dixon.
So Colonel Sutherland would tell the story of Staff Sergeant Donnie Dixon all the time. And Donnie was a security, in charge of the security force for Colonel Sutherland as he led the brigade during the surge in Diyala province in 2007. And they were on a patrol one day, and they were going out, and it was an incident where Staff Sergeant Dixon came up to Colonel Sutherland, and the way he describes it was that Staff Sergeant Dixon told him that he said they know where you are in formation, they know what position you're in, which was the number 5 man position. And so Donnie Dixon took Colonel Sutherland's place in formation. They essentially switched positions, and the following patrol that they went out on after they'd switched positions, Staff Sergeant Dixon was shot and killed during that patrol. And so this was a way for Colonel Sutherland to be able to honor not only Donnie and his sacrifice and his service to our nation, but also to all the service members and all of our young men and women, not the colonels and the admirals and the generals, but it was, the folks that the staff sergeants, the petty officer second classes, the privates, that this was Dixon Center was very much named in honor of those men and women who joined and so for so many of them that gave their life for somebody else during deployment.
Great, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
So, so at Dixon Center, as I said, we were traveling around, ended up going to another several hundred communities, working with communities, and we kept going. And an opportunity in 2017 came up in San Diego for the president and CEO position of Veterans Village of San Diego. And at that time, when the opportunity first came up, I had no interest in applying, but after talking with Dave, he convinced me that I should apply and just see what happens. And, as they always say, you can always turn it down if it's not the right opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I did apply. went through the interview process, and in May of 2017, I was offered the position of president and CEO, and I accepted. It was again, let's go with it. Let's take this opportunity and run with it. And so in June of 2017, I packed up all my stuff, packed up the car, packed up the yellow lab named Trouble, and we drove across country to San Diego. And in 2017 in July, I took over as president and CEO of Veterans Village of San Diego as the first non-Vietnam veteran, first female CEO to lead that organization. And I was very honored to do so, because to me that showed the board of directors and the community that there was a shift in service, a shift in mindset from going from the traditional service provider veteran, needs of the Vietnam veteran to now the more Gulf War and post 9/11 veterans and their needs and their growing numbers of services required. And so having that shift and bringing me in was a big move for not only the organization of Veterans Village of San Diego, but the community as a whole.
Now, how long has that been around, the veteran?
Well, VBSD was actually started in 1981 by 5 combat Vietnam veterans.
Okay, wow.
And it was formed for combat Vietnam veterans that came back from Vietnam and needed something in San Diego, and they couldn't find what they wanted, so they started their own organization. And they didn't want to become another chapter of Vietnam Veterans of America, so they named their organization Vietnam Veterans of San Diego. In fact, still today, the organization's 501c3 name is still Vietnam Veterans of San Diego, but they do business as Veterans Village of San Diego because they recognize the fact, again, it is more than just Vietnam veterans that they're serving. It's all generations of veterans that they're serving.
Now, is there a nonprofit in San Diego where they build homes for veterans? They're building homes, or is that the same?
Well, for us, it was very much traditionally for VVSD. It was primarily a residential treatment program. So it was all based on the 5-acre campus right there in San Diego, right across the street from MCRD.
Oh, it's right there. Okay, wow. Yeah. Really, where?
I was stationed at MCRD. It used to be the site of an old pink hotel. So I don't know if you ever.
So is it on the other side of 5 from MCRD?
No, it is on the same side as 5 as MCRD, right next to the old Spay War, now known as Nav War.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I know where you're talking about now. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I spent over 3 years stationed at MCRD. They're off Pacific Highway, and yeah, I know exactly where you are. So, okay, cool.
Yeah, no, and it's so the services that, like I said, it was traditionally a residential treatment facility, and even then, as you start looking at the environmental changes and the needs changes for our veterans, even when it comes to homeless veterans, not every homeless veteran their condition is the same. Not the way things are now. It used to be, in order to get a voucher or HUD-VASH voucher or to get into housing or to get anything, you needed to go through a residential treatment type program. These days, there are so many options that you don't have to go through that in order to get housing.
So what type of treatments? What type of treatments were, health, and what were some of the services?
So everything from case management to therapy, substance use disorder treatment. For many of our veterans going through the residential treatment, just trying to cope with not having that urge to go drink a liter of vodka every day, or a 6-pack of beer, or whatever it may be, or to go get high on meth or cocaine, right? So many of them having to start dealing with not having that urge to go out and use drugs, as well as dealing with some sort of trauma that had occurred in their life. Everything from, we had veterans that had dealt with a combat post-traumatic stress, to pre-childhood trauma, so growing up in abusive homes or gang-related activity, to military sexual trauma. And so dealing with all of those different types of trauma, coupled with the addictive, nature of having that substance use disorder, it was a very challenging situation. So we had a very robust team of case managers and therapists and licensed professionals that could help our veterans go through the residential treatment. And we actually ended up with 2 different residential treatment programs, one funded by the county and one funded by the VA.
So you had a full staff of obviously providers and healthcare professionals and substance abuse counselors, all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, cool.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. For some reason, I thought the Veterans Village was like homes for veterans.
Well, and because
I'm totally out of it.
Well, no, it's you're not that far off, because there's 50 to 100 organizations out there with the name Veterans Village in it.
Okay.
And many of them do build like tiny homes for veterans or.
Well, yeah, the reason I asked about the building homes, because I just know this Navy doctor who was at Camp Pendleton for a while, Herman Gonzalez. I went to high school with him, and him and his partner, she also went to high school with us, actually in Rota, Spain. They're both from military families, but they were involved in a nonprofit that was building homes or rehabilitating homes for veterans, and it was in San Diego. So I thought it was connected in some way, but obviously I'm man.
Well, I mean, the great thing about San Diego is everybody's doing something, right? And chances are, if once a veteran goes through a program or some type of services at VBSD, they could get connected to now this other organization or other organizations for that continuum of care.
Mm-hmm.
At VBSD. And so one of the things that happened while I was there in the 2 years and 8 months that I was CEO was that we actually built an apartment complex in Escondido, which for veterans that had HUD-VASH vouchers. So 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom apartments.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So you're alluding that you were there, so you're doing something else now.
I am. A great opportunity came up, and in February of this year, the end of February this year, I departed VBSD and went over to National University to be their senior vice president for military, veteran, and government affairs. Because not only working at my experience working at Dixon Center and traveling around the country looking for different services, finding out what the impact and finding out what the needs were, and then really being, in the dugouts, so to speak, on the deck plate level at VBSD, seeing all of these veterans and figuring out what is some of the things that could have been done further up the stream to prevent these veterans from ending up homeless, ending up dealing with unemployment and severe mental health issues and severe addiction issues. And I think one of the key things is education, getting certifications, getting licenses, getting some sort of college education, whatever it might be, so that folks can now get into meaningful employment. If we can start looking at early intervention and prevention of mental health services, getting education where it's needed early, especially if they don't have it, and then getting them connected to meaningful employment opportunities, I think we can start reducing the number of veterans that can fall through the cracks and end up unemployed and homeless.
Great. So that sort of brings us up to date, right? Where you are.
Yes.
So, cool. Well, what I want to kind of dig into is a couple things. So I think what's interesting is you spent the last couple years of active service actually in the same world that you ended up in, or kind of, it was a ramp to a world that you entered in nonprofit and servicing veterans and taking care of veterans, if you want to use that phrase, but in the veteran space, I'll put it that way. So, and I remember, as I said, I joined Microsoft almost 10 years ago, so late 2010, and that's probably around the same time or real close to when you and Colonel Sutherland started your tour, your grand tour of the U.S. and honestly, after speaking to you guys a couple of times, I I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you guys in traveling around and meeting with a number of companies and nonprofits and for-profit organizations now in the veteran space in this post 9/11 world of taking care and or trying to do something good for this population or this generation of veterans, that part of what you guys were doing was kind of sniffing out the good and the bad. Am I
Yes.
right? Am I right in that assessment? Because I think just from questions asked and how you maybe looked or had these discussions and who you met with, you were sniffing out kind of who was legit, who was credible, and who should maybe DoD be supporting or partnering with. And I got into this space. I'll just tell quickly. I don't want to. This is your time, but I just want to give you my quick history that brought me to what I do today. So post 9/11, I was a reservist, and I was doing a 90-day active duty orders at Camp Lejeune with 2MEF just to get a good year in the reserves. I had gone to Europe. I was living in Europe. My wife and I had gone there in 99. And so my orders were from July 1st, 2001 to October 1st, 2000. I was at Camp Lejeune in the clinic, in the waiting room, watching 9/11 happen on the TV. And then a couple days later, I saw someone. And then my attitude at that point was, I'm in. I'm volunteering. Whatever the Marine Corps wants me to do, I'm in. So I ended up doing almost probably 6 years of active service in like three long-term sets of orders. And I was at Quantico on active duty at headquarters right before I started at Microsoft. And I came to Microsoft to do veteran recruiting and veteran kind of support. So I kind of got into space at probably like almost the same time you did. And so what I want you to maybe talk a little bit about or give your thoughts and opinions on is you've got, and I look at it too from my perspective in that when I first started at Microsoft and people saw I was doing veteran work, I got all these phone calls and emails. Can we partner and do this? And I didn't have much money and much of a budget, so I was kind of sniffing out who was good and bad too, right? Like who's actually legit and who's credible and these things. So talk a little bit about that, like from the perspective of you being on active duty, where you demand a audience when you come in uniform and you're representing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then you ended up at the Dixon Center, where you probably that audience looks at you a little bit different, and then getting into a post-Vietnam era organization in San Diego. So, what are your thoughts on kind of the space that you landed in, and I'm in, and that, and so yeah, go ahead.
Well, one, there's a lot of noise in this space, right? As you have probably noticed, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of efforts, and some of them may be nefarious in meaning, out to make a buck off the backs of veterans. But the majority of veteran organizations or veteran serving organizations or nonprofits have a well-meaning intent. The problem is garnering that support, i.e. fundraising, an audience to which the clients and which they want to serve. When there's so many, how do you choose? And so the challenge is also, how do you keep having the impact that you want to have, right? Especially in this ever-changing environment known as military veterans. Just because something worked for our Vietnam veterans does not mean it's going to work for our 22-year-old veteran who just got out. Because guess what? If you are not mobile and have something available on a smartphone, you're probably not communicating very effectively with that veteran. They communicate differently. They take in information differently. They even listen differently than the older generation of veterans, right? And so if your organization continues to do things the same way they've done 30 years ago and try to apply that same model today, you may die on the vine. I believe funders are looking for things that are innovative. I think funders want to be on the cutting edge of what's new because they want to see the impact of their dollar as well. Before, back in the day, it may have been, okay, here's $20,000, go off and do good things with it and just let me know if you need some more money. It doesn't work that way anymore. People want to know how much of this $1 I'm going to give you is going to go to programs, and what of that 90, say it's 90%, what does that 90 cents do? Like, how many veterans is it going to impact? Is it going to get them jobs? Is it going to get them mental health services? Is it going to connect them to, maybe a service provider that's going to get them this? Is it going to enable them to own a house successfully? That is changing. I think not everyone can do everything that they want to do. And so when I would say, and probably you as well, Joe, on any given 6-month period, I will have at least 10 calls of folks saying, I've got this great idea and I want you to point me to funding.
Right.
Well, you do realize that there are 3 or 4 other organizations that are probably doing the exact same thing as you are and have been around much longer. Well, yeah, but I'm going to come at it from this point of view. All right, so the more organizations that get started, granted well-intended, the harder it's going to be to have that funding and be sustainable.
Yeah, I think that, that's the good and the bad of being associated with a brand like Microsoft, because you get the people who are like, they assume we're just writing checks. We just got money growing on trees. Yeah, we're just writing checks. And then so they got both, so you can't really escape it when you're associated with a company that. But one thing I want to add real quick, and you talk about the donors, and maybe I'm just more aware of it, but I think this generation, people are more giving. I think there more people are apt to maybe not just money, but time, like volunteering, and seems to be a much more structure around it. I mean, I have 2 daughters, high school daughter in 8th grade, and when they're coached on college applications, they're said, hey, you should have volunteer time, and this should be, and they even make that part of what they do in high school. It's like service time, right? And I don't remember any of that growing up. So I think it's like I said, maybe I'm just more aware, but I do think there's more giving of either time or money in today's society, especially among veterans. I think veterans do a great job overall of doing that.
Well, there absolutely is. There absolutely is. There's a lot of goodwill and generosity out there, but people want to be involved with organizations that are having impact. And I the more impact you can have, and the greater good that you can have, the more people are going to want to be involved with your effort.
Awesome. So, so you kind of lessons. You can't do everything. 4 or 5 other people have the same idea. So kind of what are some maybe key lessons that you would want to share for folks in the nonprofit world, or individuals who are just thinking of supporting the veteran community?
One of the things that I'm working on, not only did I work on this at VBSD, but now at National University, is finding partnerships to create a collaborative effort, right? So take National University, for instance. What I'm trying to do is work to develop programs that not only where service members and veterans and their families can come to get a great education, but it's got to be more than that, right? It's the partnerships to organizations that can offer supports and resources to those student veterans or their families while they're going to take classes, whether it be mental health or financial planning or daycare or whatever it may be, so that that family can go to school. And then working with employers so that there is a pathway to employment, whether it's internships, interviews, mentorships, whatever it may be, because I think it's got to be more collaborative in nature. As you are aware, Joe, for a long time, the military veteran space has been very stovepiped in our efforts. These folks are going to be doing this, these folks are going to be doing this, and these folks are going to be doing this, and nobody talked to anybody. I think the world is such now, especially now with COVID-19, we are all now have to figure out, well, what next? What next? And what do we need to do as we evolve out of COVID-19 and this pandemic to enable our service members and their families to have the best opportunity available? With so many people unemployed now, the folks that are out there are going to, when the jobs start emerging back into the marketplace, how many are going to be competing for that same job? How are we as organizations that support our military and veteran community going to enable our folks to have the best chance at getting that job to be able to support their families? So I think collaboration is key as we move forward.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's just a key point in today is, you bring up COVID and where people are today and the collaborative tools that the internet, I mean, we're here using a collaborative tool to record this. Shameless plug for Microsoft Teams. But yeah, and I think you can make that impact can be greater when you bring the force multiplier of collaboration together, and really that's just an awesome way of encapsulating the lessons into, because there's obviously people learn, and if you're a lifelong learner, you keep learning and you keep bringing in lessons from kind of the after action report, right? The hot wash of what you did, and you bring that learning forward. So, well, anything you want to close with, Kim?
No, I mean, one, thank you for everything that you do. And for those that are listening to this, find a way to have impact. Find a way to give back to folks that have maybe a little less than you do, to enable them to have opportunities that maybe they don't have now. Because I think if we all work together, we'll be able to leave this world a better place than the way we found it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll just end on a lighter note here. I'm observing the either window or wall AC air conditioning unit that's sitting behind you. Only in a city that winter summer temperatures vary by about 10 degrees will somebody have a wall air conditioner. So
that's San Diego.
Is that what it is? Is that what it is?
It is. And we have one of them.
And you must live. And you must live close to either I-5 or west of I-5, since that's where the temperatures sort of stay more constant.
Well, we're in Mission Valley, so
yeah, so you're close. You're close.
Not
far.
So,
okay, cool. Yeah, I had to say something, because that was like I live, because people don't have air conditioning up here in the Pacific Northwest. So, well, Kim, thank you very much. It's been my honor to learn a little bit more about you and even learn more. I know that we're connected and we get together periodically. So I look forward to the next time we meet. And thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening to the My Veteran Experience podcast. You can find us on YouTube. Thank you.